第一个落汤水，那我跟那个是我们姐妹市协会办，对，洪斌你认识吗？
哦，知道。
对，那他。我们来这边玩一玩，大部分让他搞一般当年小大使都会。
Kevin 在挖起啊，但是不会开始。
我叫伊后伊唱3条歌，台湾国乐团，伊旧年唱《蒙阿波嘛卡去》，伊也袂歹啊，台南人反正咱甲咱啉红酒人就出。
Kevin，
还好吧，不会。
有
帮他说一个
不会，他这种职位，他觉得阿哥他很，一关很所以讲 Kevin 啊，我知道那个吴思华，他们来，他叫我们一些人去 ，Kevin 要跟你讲，一讲体育的部分，说公司怎么了解，我看就很喜欢看篮球，他也来去3条歌，2条里面，他已经唱第2名。
咱们这里听得到你？
听得到吗？他有那个 lake 30秒。
delay 30秒。所以老前面 accident 的跟到疯掉。
不能在这里讲话，不能再讲，这都直播出去。
那现在拿
这个没有这个按这里。
根本上在直播。
讲话刚才都有听到。
哇，
有吗？
那我可以进去
可以，你可以看，你可以看。
从哪里进去？
我们有一个 link， 你寄到那个群组。你不要把那个我寄给你。
Kevin， 你可以看那个我们 chapter 的群组，你可以转给那个
我跟他的 chapter，
因为你不是 chapter， 所以以为让你来。
我叫。
我觉得声音很清楚。
我来帮你这边 what's going on。
第一都，我叫数媒球，我叫那个。
真假的？
这个我们。
可以，赞哎。
OK。
你说收音，那我们就不需要麦克风。
那个。
Yeah， 一个。怎么办？7月太轻了。可是我是，其实我们是很讲，会很多杂。
听了，我才
要不要开这个？
我只跟你讲说，我们晚上下午才会到。
Testing， check。
下午几点会到？7月4号有班。
7月4号你尤其11点，差1点话几点，嘛是爱4、5点。
是 Jenny 吗？
你有记得当然我先寄那个FAPA这个
Testing。
数码就寄到那个，我寄到那个会长群组，你看转好吗？好不好？所以大家。
Testing， check。Testing。喂，温迪声音还可以吗？温迪。
好，这个是有的。你要是没有的吗？
好啊。
你要是没有，没有办法。
我还有麦克风，要不然真的说，我数码就寄过去。
温迪，我现在讲话没有麦克风，你听得到吗？
我相信就算有报名的也可以。
温迪，我现在讲话没有麦克风。
你今晚直播，你今晚唱歌感觉 OK
哦。那我们就麦克风就去了。
你要先唱歌啦，你唱嘛
都不法度。我声音都就快。
You can finally take a break, huh?
Yeah. take a break.
哦，真的，哇哦，你的
But
相
yeah, I'm still coming in.
Wow.
Help.
Oh, sorry, I have heard it.
Yeah.
叫安稳，对。
你慢学，我叫陈鹏。
Yeah, it's always hard.
我现在可以给你我的文件。
You're on the receiving end, he was on the giving
啊，
end.
对，他是我同事。
I've been for so long,
Oh,
I'm
this is
part of this,
weird.
I'm not very well organized. So I've
了
got
解了解。
20 years
对，他也是这样子。
full of stuff. I have to
我
organize
去年
things.
毕业，我在
I mean,
AU。
what's amazing what I find things like this.
Volunteer work.
I
怎么样？
don't
最近？
know
对
whether
啊，
I
我要
would
去
in
哪
the first place. This is,
辛苦
this
了。
is, very original document. And I found a letter,
对，你是做什么的？
I gave Coleman a proposal in 1986.
昨天晚上，
我等一下要去哪？摄影台。
And then in 2002, I sent a proposal to be.
哦，你说，
So I'm finding all this stuff, it's like,
你是做经济。
他刚刚要关键词。
我刚刚关键词。哦，我做的简介是那种很多人有那种，很多数学那种。
I know it's there, but
有大概前几天，
hopefully.
我们大概上。
yeah, this is.
Yeah, very
Sketches for the software.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's funny.
Because it's very, it's good.
So we went to upstate
突然的 busy style。
哦，对啊。
Denver.
没关系，我们可以直接加
At
的。
one point, FAPA has a competition for
Oh, really?
And he said, this is a design that he never submitted.
哦，
Amazing. Such an amazing.
1982.
1982. Yeah.
跟我一
So
样
all these
到这个原来
things
是
we need to kind of,
只是我
so we encourage him to write those things and then
我不来这，
along the document.
我在对面，
Scan it.
你知道塔可以就是very one side 的塔。
No, what's that?
Yeah, no, my wife keeps saying.
它叫 international time investment。
Yeah.
Writing your memories.
I
Yeah, yeah.
said that
One
when
sentence.
所以我是做投资，
start writing.
就对投资跟税务
This。is a lot of just get it. You know, get a little older, you start forgetting some things, and then it's everything. And
Kumba is writing his.
yeah, good. He's got it.
over here.
你是读哪里？
Right? I just read
哦，MIES 哦。
Yeah. You know,
Yeah, I'm also that.
yes, we tried to get her
I also
H1B visa.
US and Papa
Completion.
first.
First round.
And so she's kind of chosen.
I didn't realize she moved over to the DPA office. And then
One, yeah, one is like, yeah, president. Yeah, the UK investment. That's probably too much.
how long have you been working?
Yeah, she's hoping.
Maybe I will until like she was like
Yes.
yeah, we are just figure out how to make yeah. Stay here.
Oh, it is true. You will also have they go there to study another degree.
Right.
And then.
You stay and work, it's like getting an H1B without having a formal.
Right.
But you can also work there.
Yes.
More
You have to make tuition there. You go there every month, once a month, yeah, for 1 day. Rest of the day. Nathaniel Love.
Mark.
Nice to meet you.
From the Performance and Association of Public Affairs.
Okay.
You're from TSMC?
I am, good sir. I'm interning for this summer, so. Trying to learn what's possible. And go into a lot of events. You know, the time to come. Especially this very
So you actually are you are TSMC employee,
interning in Washington D.C. The government.
Which government affairs division? That's administration. It's not a company.
No, yeah. So it's a part of the full company. So TSMC obviously is Taiwanese. They're in North America.
Right.
And then you have our newsletter, Arizona.
Right.
Government affairs like
Right. Okay. The last couple of days, we went to Albany, and then Syracuse.
Okay.
And Albany, you know, they are also these.
I mean, you're still
I
here.
don't know about it. They're chip making company. They're not doing that great because all the computers TSMC. But Michael is investing in Syracuse.
By choice.
So they compete whoever. So yeah, it's interesting.
It is. It's interesting. New York was one of the states that was bidding for to have TSMC, Phoenix. I'm from there. So I always tell people that the desert is going to become bigger as far as really our talent. So to figure it out, because right now there's not a big competition. Learning from that.
We actually heard it on the radio now when somebody talked about changes on the community college for this type of work. They should be able to manage that.
I agree. I think it's more so the willingness from the because for so long it really hasn't been until now, and I think people are starting to understand it is very important. And one thing that I think is pushing for all of the kind of push is going to advancing it's also going to make sure that talent. I am very interested in the age group. Just to see how everything.
You're going to get our contribution from the U.S. FAB.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the one thing I know about TSMC is they're I know. I'm sure you're well aware of that. There's going to be a lot of learning going on. The one thing I know, especially in that area, is innovation is going to be super important. And I'm excited. I don't know if Taiwan is going to grow. It's very important. And my undergrad, and I think make the world better. People grow,
So you're a business major now?
Yeah, business administration. I want to end up doing human resources. And one day, opportunities to grow from
I think it's your office in DC.
I'm for a lot of the North America, from what I've gathered, a lot of them are right now engineers. And then you have that's more like and I believe that's like CC is the guy. He was supposed to come one of our other how the moves forward. I see how this
FAPA actually.
You, in terms of the,
I'm retired now from a big job.
Gotcha.
I used to work for Johnson & Johnson.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I work for a new drug pharmaceutical development.
It's a whole other reason itself, right?
Oh yeah, you should put your name in a hat, so that whenever there are activities, they'll inform you to come.
Oh yeah, I put my name on it.
Wonderful new office of the Yeshiva and also have a campus.
I think the organizer is not from I just participate this time. Okay. But we are a big organization. More chapters.
You know, anyone always welcome
We have over 28,800
Yes.
Okay. So basically we're doing
That's awesome. No, that's great. Let's keep you busy.
Washington, D.C.
Okay, good.
No, he just called me Mark.
I'll be sure.
Okay.
One of the things that I'll say is the big thing that I've found just recently is communication. Like you said, those meetings with really
They're not a stuff.
yeah, that's it. They don't really know what it is.
Yeah. I was like,
Oh yeah, you should join you should join the organization.
no, so I kind of like messed up my schedule. I mean, I can start on like
Hi, Carol. I'm Nathaniel. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. I was blessed with a good one.
He's not working. He is into
We have a small office in DC, very close to Chinatown, and very close. It's right by the Carnegie building, so I'm right there. It's a very small office, but small but mighty, and we do a lot of work and try to keep up with the times. So I am. It's been especially about how we can further business is a very important part of growing and strengthening ties. And I'm a business guy. I think it's just kind of TSMC. I've been with TSMC for, it's honestly hasn't been that long, 2 to 3 weeks since I've gotten to DC. Yeah, so I came from Arizona. We're currently building the labs. So it's been a very cool experience. I did a lot of research on there. Very strong work. And I thought I'd fit right in. Oh yeah, that's what's up. Oh yeah, continues to skyrocket. I think it's because, we're going to, it's public knowledge, it's been raising the price. Hey, you guys are drawing. We're going to need raise trucks and to see, and like I said, what a time to be part of the organization.
Hello everyone. We will start with 10:30. So have your seat and get some coffee. Then we will start at 10:30 on time. Thank you.
You want like a direct speech?
他有帮忙叫 police， 他还在。我前几天有在那个花圈骂，你知道那个骂。然后他 undergraduate 他也是不知道。
We will start within 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
他知道你，他知道我，你不知道我。
Stay 1 more minute. So I can get some coffee and donuts. We made it very hard for donuts this morning, so try some. Yeah, fresh donut.
Want to lower it?
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Tuesday morning. My name is Kevin Huang, the president of our FAPA DC chapter. This event is hosted by US Taiwan Watch and FAPA DC chapter. So please allow me to introduce a little bit to everyone, and in the future maybe you will remember FAPA DC chapter and the US Taiwan Watch. US Taiwan Watch is a non-profit with team members across the US and Taiwan. Initially, they built a website to collect US bills related to Taiwan and subsequently produce numbers, articles, and podcasts to promote understanding of the US-Taiwan relationships in Mandarin. With their growing presence, US Taiwan Watch is now aiming to amplify Taiwanese voice and perspectives in DC through events, publications, and research. That's a US Taiwan Watch. And our FAPA DC chapter is also 501c3 nonprofit. We do not fundraise for or endorse candidates and elected officials. However, we encourage our FAPA members to be politically active and regularly attend local town halls and events with their members of Congress to relay them the message of US-Taiwan relations. So that's why today this panel discussion events, the main purpose of our two organizations to host these events. Okay, before we start our programs, it's my pleasure to introduce our today's opening remark. It's a newly appointed DPP, Director DPP in United States, Ms. Hsiao. Please arise.
All right, Kevin. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. It's really strange to see Kevin outside of the Taiwan school where, without kids. Good morning. So on behalf of the DPP and Team Taiwan, I'd like to extend a big warm welcome to all of you here today. Thank you for joining us to discuss Taiwan's new political landscape and the global strategy after President Lai and Vice President Hsiao's inauguration a few weeks ago. I want to thank the GTI Executive Director Russell Hsiao, the FAPA Executive Director Anny Hsiao. 3 Hsiao is a strikeout. And then of course very distinguished journalist William Yang for joining us. And I also want to congratulate FAPA DC President Kevin Huang and Peng Xuanchen of the US Taiwan Watch for organizing this timely event. And of course, I'll be remiss if I didn't thank my predecessor, Mr. Mike Fonte, for his wise counsel, and my research associate, Kevin Chu, for his contribution in this time of transition. We all know that the US-Taiwan relations have made significant strides in the recent years. These remarkable achievements are not only due to the extraordinary geopolitical circumstances, but also because of the evolution of Taiwan's democratization and economic development. We're forever indebted to those who have come before us, including my predecessor Mike, the founders and advocates from organizations like DPP, FAPA, GTI, and that each one of us represents today. Together with so many unsung heroes who have sacrificed in service to Taiwan's democracy and freedom, we share a sense of purpose and pride in what we have accomplished together. So what's next? I was in Taiwan for the inauguration. Sitting at the presidential plaza was almost like a parallel universe to what the media and pundits in DC were razor focused on. Of course, there's attention on how President Lai would continue, and he would, the cross-strait policy of keeping the status quo and the 4 commitments to maintaining the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait. But a real response came from the loud cheers in the crowd of the day. These cheers were loud when President Lai mentioned that Taiwan was the first country in Asia to legalize the same-sex marriage. Loud when they hear Taiwan's ranking high in global freedom and democracy. Loud when they hear Taiwan is on the leading edge of the artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and advanced technologies. I believe this audience is well versed on what President Lai's policy platform, like the 4 pillars of peace action plan on defense, economy, cross-strait, and value-based diplomacy. But also, I think it's useful for all of us here today having all worked on advancing the U.S.-Taiwan partnership, to take a moment to reflect on how to further align our priorities in both Taipei and Washington in a way that benefits the people of both countries, the Indo-Pacific region, and beyond. So first, President Lai has been clear about his commitments to the continuity in maintaining cross-strait peace and stability and status quo, his commitment to accelerate defense reforms, overcoming China's authoritarian and gray zone challenges, and also how to message more clearly to the Taiwanese citizens the nature of China's threat today, and why it's crucial for Taiwan to take on more challenging but necessary defense reforms, and why it's important to beef up our whole of society resilience and civil defense. Therefore, I think it will be helpful for us to continue shining a light on what we're up against, such as China's cognitive warfare, seeking to amplify US skepticism or skepticism in the West in general. And of course, the situation in the legislative yuan, for example, how the KMT version of the infrastructure bill could severely crowd out critical needed defense budget and social welfare. And we also should continue encouraging Washington on regular arms sales and finding ways to accelerate deliveries and training. The second thing on top of mind when I talk to the officials in Taipei is economic and trade. The U.S.-Taiwan 21st Century Trade Initiative and how to expedite relief on double taxation remain a top priority in our bilateral relations. And as I noted earlier, the Lai administration is enthusiastic about economic and tech policy. And I believe there's a real opportunity that our Taiwanese American community here could seize upon. The world has witnessed, right after inauguration, how the Taylor Swift of tech, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, and Lisa Su of AMD, stirring up the compute tax in Taipei. So we could really be shameless to say, well, they are one of our own, right? So just like the President Lai and he said in his inaugural speech, Taiwan is a key player in supply chains for global democracies. Taiwan is incredibly well positioned in this new Let Us Work strategy that the White House recently announced. We could really do so much more to help bring forward the public-private sector partnership and to build on our substantial connectivities in these forward-leaning areas of AI, telecommunications, semiconductors, with our friends from the US, Japan, Philippines, India, Europeans, and of course our diplomatic allies. So last, I would just say this, and appreciate our TTI friends here for highlighting the internalization of Taiwan from the very beginning. That President Lai and his predecessor, President Tsai, have done remarkable work to put Taiwan at the center of the world stage. We are thankful for the Biden administration's vocal support in pushing back on the PRC's mischaracterization of the UN Resolution 2758. And in a bipartisan way, we as a community will certainly continue our long-standing efforts in advocating for Taiwan's participation in the United Nations and other international organizations. With that, I want to thank you all today for coming. We really honored to be able to provide a venue for this very enlightening discussion. We look forward very much to work with like-minded friends as one team, one fight. Go Team Taiwan. Thank you.
Okay, so we can start our programs, and last hour, Anny Hsiao is our moderator. He started. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Anny Hsiao, or Hsiao, and I am currently the Executive Director for the Formosan Association for Public Affairs. And I'm honored to be here this morning to be the moderator of this very esteemed panel of speakers. So first and foremost, we would like to open up the session today with remarks by each and every one of these panelists. And what I will do is I will start with William for his remarks. So before you start, I'm just going to provide a little bit of introduction of William's background. So William Young is a freelance correspondent for Voice of America, covering China, Taiwan, and East Asia. His work has also appeared in the BuzzFeed News, The Guardian, and Deutsche Welle. He was previously a correspondent and later news director for Kedagon Media, which provides coverage of Taiwan-related news and commentary for English speakers. With over 5 years of experience in writing, editing, photography, and multimedia production for media outlets, NGOs, and startups, he covers a wide range of issues, including LGBTQ rights, social movements, business, politics, military, technology, and even investigative projects. He holds a bachelor's in foreign languages and literature from Tonghua University in Taichung, and a master's in journalism from Temple University, formerly based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And now he lives in Taipei. William, please. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for having me here today. It's a great privilege to be here with other distinguished panelists. And I think maybe, since I'm the only one that is currently still based in Taiwan and have been there for the last 11 years, working as a journalist, starting out at Kedagon Media with Chaitin and others that maybe a lot of you are familiar with, and then later transitioned into covering Taiwan and the Greater China region for the international media outlets. I think I'll provide a little bit more of the current dynamics on the ground in Taiwan. I think there has sort of been a good switch of the mood change in Taipei since the election outcome in January. I think on the night, everyone obviously was relieved in a way that the DPP was able to secure the unprecedented third consecutive term in the presidential race. I think the whole world was also lauding that achievement, which shows how the Tsai administration's policies over the last 8 years have really secured and anchored the DPP as sort of this more forward-looking political party that is in touch with the transition that we have been seeing in the public opinion polls and the recognition of the identity in Taiwan since democratization and the first presidential election in 1996. But I think what was overlooked was the upcoming challenges of the DPP losing the majority in the legislative yuan. At the time, I think not too many people really paid attention to what that could mean for the Lai administration coming in and their policy implementations, and also just the fulfillment of their visions. And I think since the start of the new legislature in February, we have already been seeing the step-by-step kind of encroachment and the limits that the opposition parties are gaining up in the legislature, and try to condition the Lai administration's, I think, flexibility and the room for them to maneuver on key issues, including defense, and also, I think, cross-strait, some of the key cross-strait policies that have been raised as areas that should be improved, including oversight about the exchanges that lawmakers can have with Chinese counterparts or any Chinese government officials, and at the same time the efforts to, I think, beef up Taiwan's defense against infiltration and also espionage and other kind of activities. We saw the first step in early May, just a few days before the inauguration, that started with the expansion of the power of the legislature to scrutinize the government. And I think then we are seeing a pattern emerging where the two opposition parties are seeing the goal of, I think, in my view, undermining the Lai administration's ability to govern as their consensus to work together. There might still be a lot of disagreements under the table, but I think the overall goal is strong enough for them to believe that it's in their best interest to continue this pattern. So right after the controversial bill was passed, and now obviously was in review, but I think we will see what happens next week, because that's when the actual, I think, debate is going to happen. And then they are now starting to move forward to the budgetary aspect, which to most Taiwanese people, they would think that this is just a regular thing to benefit the local governments. But if we look at the local landscape, where the KMT controls more than two-thirds of the local governments across Taiwan, and looking very likely to perhaps be able to hold on to that even in the upcoming election in 2026. This, I think, is a warning sign about how they are using this reform to the budgetary allocation to weaken the central government's ability to allocate budgets to key areas, including defense and also energy transition, for example. And I think right now the Lai administration somehow, in my opinion, has not really been able to come up with a very effective response to all these challenges. I think since the start of the whole controversial bill to expand the legislative power, what we have seen from the DPP side, unfortunately, is really pushing themselves into almost kind of like a dead end. They keep doubling down on the narrative that this is all part of the scheme from China and the collusion between the opposition parties and China. But I think one thing that's very important to make these very serious allegations is that you need to have direct proof in order to actually make these allegations directly accusing certain lawmakers or certain political parties of doing something like that. Otherwise, if you just keep repeating that, it turns into conspiracy theory, unfortunately, and it becomes the ammunition for your opponents to just accuse you of trying to mislead the public. And unfortunately, that has somehow become the way that their response to the opposition party's amendments has backfired, in my opinion. The public opinion hasn't really swung back behind the DPP. I think the 100,000 people that we saw outside the legislature are mostly concerned citizens that would, in any election, vote for the DPP. They unfortunately did not let their messages penetrate beyond the DPP supporters or like-minded supporters, because I think exactly of the fact that they push themselves into a corner where there's no way out for them now, because they've already made the serious allegations. They can only keep doubling down on the fact that this is all part of China's plan. But without direct proof, I think this is only going to weaken the ability for them in the future to keep using the China threat rhetoric. And unfortunately, I think this is also a pattern that we've been seeing since probably the second term in Tsai administration, because during the lead up to the election in 2020, what we saw is they really doubled down on the Hong Kong protest and the China threat, and Taiwan cannot turn into another Hong Kong. It worked in that election. And Lai Ching-te basically follow up again on that same strategy, worked a lot less effectively, in my opinion, judging from the outcome of the vote that he won and also the public opinions against him since the election outcome. I think, unfortunately, while he became the third-term president for the DPP in likely 12-year span, he is facing a lot of different baggages. Domestic baggages in terms of people getting very tired about the same political party, and unfortunately he has not been able to come up with new, refreshing, and effective, and also at the same time very concrete strategies for the DPP to kind of convince the people why they deserve a third term or even a fourth term if he's running for re-election in 2028. And at the same time, the opposition parties are in a much stronger position compared to 2016, 2020 because of the external environment changing and also just the domestic, I think, public opinion also changing a little bit. So I think what is at stake right now is his government really needs to find a way to break through of the current bottleneck that we're seeing. Otherwise, if they only continue to double down on this China threat strategy, from my opinion, it's very likely that they're not only not going to do well again in the 2026 local election, the 2028 election is also going to be a warning sign, especially if we look at the number of seats that they lost in some of the most contentious races across Taiwan during the legislative election. That was also a warning sign. They lost a lot of their incumbents lost to first-time, very young KMT legislators, and some of them even lost not in a very small margin. I think they should understand what that means in terms of the DPP's ability to connect at the grassroots level. This, in my opinion, is really something that they are losing touch with, and they don't have a strategy to address it. And going forward, that's really going to just weaken, I think, their ability to continue rely on their obviously great advantage of using social media, using mass media to fight the elections. I think for the Tsai Ing-wen era, it worked really well because at the time people were really frustrated after Ma Ying-jeou's 8-year term, and there was that imminent sense of threat coming from China. But I think as Taiwanese people grow more numb to the Chinese threats, it also decreases the effectiveness of the same rhetoric that the DPP can use. And another baggage I think Lai Ching-te unfortunately has is his personal political track record, that in the past he did make some quite, in my opinion, provocative languages when he was the premier or even when he was the Tainan mayor. Those records will forever be with him. So he needs to, unfortunately, work a lot harder to shake off those labels. But unfortunately, those labels right now are being enlarged and highlighted more by the opposition party, by Beijing, and also some skeptics around the world about his ability to really stabilize the Taiwan Strait situation, even though what we're seeing obviously is Beijing is the one that is encroaching that status quo. But domestically, the opposition party's accusations against him is working and will continue to work to a certain extent. I think as Taiwanese people continue to have fear, certain Taiwanese people, have the increased fear about a potential military conflict with China because of the ongoing war in Ukraine. I think that reflection is also something that a lot of, us in Taiwan or around the world is not really recognizing. But the Ukraine war and the fear for the potential conflict with China is really increasing, in my opinion. So I think right now, what I'm seeing is a more pessimistic outlook for the Lai administration. It's an uphill battle, and unless he can really, I think, overcome that disadvantage of not having the majority in the legislature, his administration will be crippled from left and right by the opposition party with the same goal of basically preventing him from potentially having a second term.
Thank you so much for your remarks, William. You touched on a lot of subjects that we're going to go into when we get into the moderated discussion period, and then that'll be followed by Q&A by the audience. So next up, I'd like to welcome Mike Fonte. Mike Fonte is the Senior Advisor and former Director of the DPP mission in the US, where he facilitates engagement between the Democratic Progressive Party and policymakers in Washington. His connection to Taiwan dates back to 1967 through 1970, when he served as a Catholic missionary in Taiwan. Before joining the DPP mission as a liaison in 2002, he He was Senior Policy Analyst at the Formosan Association for Public Affairs, FAPA, where he tracked U.S. policy toward Taiwan, developments in Taiwanese politics, and produced opinion pieces, journal articles, and newsletters. From 1993 to 1999, he served as an executive director for the Council for a Livable World Education Fund, and previously worked as a foreign policy analyst and consultant for various international groups and clients. He holds a Master's of Theology degree from the Mary Knoll Seminary and an MA in Chinese Studies from the University of Michigan. Please let's welcome Mike Fonte.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Annie, very much. Are we on here? Yeah. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks, William, for a sparkling introduction, actually. Some very interesting insights. Let me back up a little bit, though. I want to look at the DPP's history so you can, I hope, understand where things are at today in terms of where the DPP is, what it's doing and where it's going. As Annie mentioned, I lived in Taiwan in 1967. That was martial law days. Those were martial law days. It was a very difficult time. Those of you who are old enough to have lived through some of that know that spies were everywhere, garrison troops were everywhere. You couldn't move a muscle politically without being observed and probably put into prison somewhere out on Green Island. So it was a difficult time. And I think it's important to understand that. That's kind of part of the origin of the DPP. And even back further, in 1947, there was a very important uprising called 228, February 28, 1947. What had happened was Chiang Kai-shek had come, his troops had come to control the island. They were pretty nasty, to say the least, and there was a result pushback against them, which, because the Taiwanese had the numbers, they could control the island until the Governor Generals got the troops he wanted to come and put down what he considered a rebellion. Part of that rebellion was for a group of Taiwanese who were educated, who had been part of the Japan times, colonial times, had seen some beginnings of becoming not second-class citizens, but not really quite first-class citizens. There was some movement where people could begin to get energized in the political scene. There was a lot of education. Two of my teachers that were teaching me Taiwanese had graduated from Waseda University in Japan, where a lot of people like that, had broad experience, understood the world in a different way. And they got together in that time, in 1947, and put together a petition saying, here's what we want. We would like to have basically the rights that are in the Constitution, we'd like that to be applied here in Taiwan. And as I said, the Governor General at the time, the KMT appointee, just was waiting for more troops to come. And they came, and they rounded up everybody who signed that petition, and a lot more people, maybe 20,000 or so, disappeared during that time. This is the best and brightest of the people of Taiwan. And it's something that is in the soul of so many older Taiwanese, having experienced this. My teachers all, at that point, they were all old enough to have seen the events that happened. And so it's important to understand that's kind of where the DPP comes from. It comes from this immense opposition to the oppression that was part of that period of time. They were considered second-class citizens, the peasants from the south, the ones who didn't know anything. We, the KMT officials, are going to show you how things should be done. And it was important because the people who were Taiwanese, who are Taiwanese, were not just peasants who didn't know anything else but how to farm. They were smart, they had some education, they had some understanding of what their rights were, and they wanted to see those restored. The United States was not very happy with Chiang Kai-shek. President Truman used to call him "cash my check," because he took so much money and it all disappeared. And so by the time Chiang Kai-shek got to Taiwan in 1949, the United States was ready to cast him away. Didn't want anything to do with him. What intervened? What was the key intervention that changed that dynamic? Korean War, exactly. The United States had drawn a line which did not include Taiwan as part of its defense perimeter. When the Korean War broke out, that's when the United States sent the 7th Fleet through through the Taiwan Strait, both to keep the Chinese from attacking Taiwan and keep Chiang Kai-shek from trying to attack China. They didn't want a two-front war. They already had enough to do with Korea. So that was the start of a long period of martial law in Taiwan. And there's a famous saying that the United States has about Somoza, who was a dictator in Nicaragua. And Franklin Roosevelt was overheard to have said, he may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And unfortunately, that was true about Chiang Kai-shek too. In the days of anti-communism, he was a bulwark anti-communist in that position. So the United States did not want to push him hard on any of the human rights issues that were so blatantly being destroyed in Taiwan. It didn't stop the Taiwanese, though, in pushing back. Peng Lei-min, who was a FAPA head in the mid-'80s, in 1964, 1964, excuse me, put together a manifesto for the restoration of the rights of the people of Taiwan, basically calling for a new constitution and a new republic to be set up. Of course, he was picked up right away, put in jail with his accomplices, and eventually went under house arrest and eventually left. But this was the kind of pushback that was going on underneath the cover of martial law. I got to know Mr. President Peng, Dr. Peng, pretty well later on. There were also other people who were trying to get elected. Kang Ning-xiang was a local official. He got elected to the Taipei City Council, eventually got to be a legislator as a non-party person. That's all you were allowed. They weren't allowed any alternative parties. So there was energy being bubbling up underneath the martial law, but it was very contained. And then what happened? Another change in the international arena. What would have happened to change the dynamic of the anti-communism pressure which used Chiang Kai-shek? Nixon going to China, right? Suddenly, China, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so the United States wanted to build a relationship with China to buffer against the Soviet Union. And that kept Taiwan in this state of kind of suspended animation, right? Because then we had this control of the apparatus by the KMT, which they didn't let go. But there wasn't a room for movement by the local Taiwanese. But they continued to do many things. There were many magazines were produced at this point, opposition magazines, talking about these issues of human rights and democracy. They would open up, they would put 2 or 3 editions out, they'd get shut down by the KMT. Next week they'd start a different one. But they kept this kind of pressure on the government. So the DPP, again, comes out of this vast mix of opposition to martial law, opposition to a lack of human rights, opposition to a lack of democracy. And so in 1986, they decide, even though it was still martial law, they would form a party. And it wasn't clear if they were all going to get thrown in jail or what was going to happen to them. So the National Democratic Institute invited them to come to Washington as a bit of an umbrella to protect them. I happened to be able to go around as their gopher, led them around to meet a variety of people. Some of you may have Chris Van Hollen as your senator. I took 2 of the wives whose husbands were political prisoners at that time to see Chris and talk about what the situation was in Taiwan. 5 more minutes, whoa. I bounced around from some of this history because I think it's important to see that the DPP came out of a long history of struggle, okay? And it wasn't easy to come to where we are today. The other thing that changed after Nixon went to China, you had Tiananmen. You thought, oh, okay, that's going to break this hold of the U.S.-China relationship. It did not. The end of the Soviet Union did not end the relationship with China. People thought that maybe if we got them in the WTO, they would slowly but surely liberalize, and we could have a better working relationship with them. Clinton came into office talking about the butchers of Beijing. He thought he was going to stop the relationship with China. He did not, for a lot of reasons. He thought maybe if they got into the WTO, they would liberalize slowly but surely, and you'd have a more friendly China. But again, this kept putting Taiwan on the back burner, right? George Bush came into office saying, "We'll do whatever it takes to defend Taiwan." And what happened to break that? 9/11, right? With the attack at 9/11, the Bush administration felt very importantly that they needed China's help in the UN, not to block any of the anti-terrorism actions they wanted to take. So again, kept the relationship going with China for that reason, and kept Taiwan a bit on the back foot. And one of the persons who was unfortunately a victim of that was Chen Shui-bian, the first Taiwanese DPP president. I was talking to a reporter at that point, and I said to the reporter, what the U.S. wants Chen Shui-bian to do is sit down and shut up. And Hsiao called me up right away and said, please don't say things like that. But that was true, that what they wanted was quiet from the Taiwanese because there was this need to keep China from pushing back against what the United States was going to do on its terrorism war. Okay, so we get to today. It's a lot of jumping around, but I wanted to point out that the most important thing about the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, what's the U.S. national interest at that given moment? And how does that impact the way the United States is going to deal with Taiwan and Taiwan's future? And I think where we're at today is a change now again in the U.S.-China relationship, right? It's gotten testy, it's very competitive, it's conflict-ridden, and I think that's why you begin to see a stronger link with Taiwan from the United States. And I think what has happened, I agree with William and a lot of his criticisms of what maybe the DPP has done or is doing, but I think there's two things that are important to point to in the current situation of the DPP. First of all is the appointment of Wellington Koo as the head of the Ministry of National Defense. And it's not just the appointment of him, but he brought together a whole plan that they have for a new strategy, for a new arms procurement, for work with the reserves. There's a range of ways in which the military dynamic will change dramatically under Wellington. And that's very important because the United States has been very pushy with Taiwan about getting its act together about its defense, right? Second thing is a new project of hope, which meets some of the questions that William raised, which is, namely, in this election, it's clear the younger cohort of voters did not vote for DPP the way they had normally voted. They voted for TPP by and large, the anti-establishment party, because, as William mentioned, there had been a lot of growth in the GDP under Tsai Ing-wen, but the growth didn't filter down. There was a lot of inequality in wages. There were problems in housing. There were other problems in child care for seniors that weren't being met effectively in people's minds. And so Lai has this project of hope, which tries to meet some of those issues. I can go through it to you. I don't think we have time to go through everything. We can talk about it in the Q&A. But it's really an attempt to focus on the issues that need attention. Investing in future generations by having child care programs, for example. Investing in affordable housing issues. Trying to provide subsidies for on a social welfare kind of approach. So there's issues that they're trying to meet. Will they meet them? This is where the question that William also raised of what the LY will do in terms of budgetary increases or lack thereof, how they will see the money appropriated. I've seen a lot in my long time relationship with Taiwan. I've seen the ups and downs. I think Taiwan's in a good place right now in terms of the fact that U.S.-China relationship is tense, and Taiwan has got a very important place to play in all of that, and there's a lot of support for Taiwan. Taiwan has to step up to its game, and I think that's what it's doing in defense, what the DPP is doing in defense, and what they're doing in terms of trying to meet social needs will make Taiwan a stronger place, and a place where the future will be brighter, I hope.
Thank you so much, Mike, for taking us back to kind of the history of DPP. And I do have a couple of follow-up questions later on, so we'll dive deeper into these domestic priorities and economic policies that Mike brought up. So our next panelist is Russell Hsiao, who is the Executive Director of the Global Taiwan Institute. He previously served as a Senior Research Fellow at the Project 2049 Institute and as a National Security Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Before these roles, he was the editor of China Brief at the Jamestown Foundation from October 2007 to July 2011, and a special associate in the International Cooperation Department at the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. Russell holds a JD and a certificate from the Law and Technology Institute at the Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law, where he also served as the editor-in-chief of the Catholic University Journal of Law and Technology. During law school, he clerked with the Office of the Chairman at the Federal Communications Commission and the Interagency Trade Enforcement Center at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Let's welcome Russell to speak.
Thank you very much, Annie, for that very kind introduction, as well as to Director Hsiao. Your leadership of this mission is something that we certainly look forward to in working with you in your new capacity, and this mission, and also the interest of the groups that you represent in your role as the head of the DPP mission here. So I think you've gotten really a good overview from the two prior speakers, whose experience as well as knowledge of issues I certainly constantly refer to in my work as the head of a think tank focused on policy research. What you heard from William was the current internal political dynamics within Taiwan, followed then by Mike's very excellent description of the sort of the long arc of the political evolution of the DPP and the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. I think what I'll try to do also, without diving too far back into history, is to provide more of a contemporary context of the various issues that I see the Lai administration facing now as he takes the mantle of leadership of Taiwan. And so what I'd like to do is just quickly provide a review of the past 8 years that are shaping the conditions under which the Lai administration engages both domestically and internationally. I'll focus much more on the international components, since William and Mike have already covered to a large extent some of the internal political dynamics. But I think it's important to look at really the starting point from 2016 with the ascendance of President Tsai Ing-wen into office. Despite a very measured and steady approach laid out in her inauguration speech in 2016, the People's Republic of China has nonetheless dismissed that as an incomplete test homework or test paper, and engaged in a concerted campaign to undermine her administration. This included a number of measures that covered and spanned the diplomatic, the military, the economic, and the political subversion campaigns that have really, I think, shaped the external context under which the Tsai administration attempted to navigate both the domestic situation within Taiwan, but also externally finding it in a very sort of a very new and tense security condition. I think we will fail to appreciate the degree to which the situation that we are in now, if we don't understand how these conditions actually continue to shape the current context of U.S.-Taiwan relations, but also cross-strait relations, right? So what are these diplomatic campaigns? I think it's, certainly for anyone who followed the news over the last 8 years, Taiwan has been bleeding diplomatic partners. I call them partners and not necessarily allies, because in fact some of the most important allies of Taiwan are not diplomatic partners at the end of the day. But nevertheless, these diplomatic partners are important for Taiwan's international diplomatic space, They provide an opportunity for when the president of Taiwan travels internationally to be able to transit through the United States and other, namely, most importantly. And so, and it is also an aim by which the PRC attempts to isolate and delegitimize the leaders of that the people of Taiwan democratically elects. So while there are polling data that do suggest that the Taiwanese people are increasingly more inured or less concerned by the loss of diplomatic partners, there are some practical elements to why these losses of diplomatic partners are important to keep in mind, despite some of these these other issues. I would further add that in the diplomatic context there now, it's important to understand that there's also a challenge to the current status quo, that the PRC is engaged in this poaching of Taiwan's diplomatic partners. Imagine a scenario, right, and keeping in mind that right now Taiwan has, I believe, 12 diplomatic partners, that were it to reach a situation where it enters into that very single digits to closer to zero, what that situation would entail. And this is much more in terms of both the domestic political context within Taiwan, but also externally as well for concerned allies and like-minded partners. This sort of inching towards diplomatic zero is a situation that would fundamentally change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, and I think Beijing knows full well that in its effort to try to delegitimize the democratic system of Taiwan, that its attempt to do so is going to really undermine peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And so as a result of this, I think there has been let me address this, sort of the reaction and how to address these issues later. But that's also been another campaign that's far more subversive. This is the political United Front campaigns that the PRC, the Chinese Communist Party, has been engaged in within Taiwan for many decades now. It is also an issue now that is increasingly facing the international democratic community, and only because that it has really been that people have seen that this is an issue that is not necessarily isolated and limited to Taiwan. That the fact that Taiwan has faced a lot of these United Front groups that essentially act as front civil society organizations, or through exchanges with their party apparatuses that that conceals their affiliations with or masks their association with the party state, and engage in malign activities that span the scope of bribery to political interference as well as espionage. These are, I think, increasingly part of the toolkits that are visible in other nations as well. But not only in the current context has these issues been addressed more nationally within Taiwan, but also internationally. And I think that national-international component reinforces one another, and that's what's created, I think, a far more resilient situation within Taiwan that is important to keep in mind going forward as I think Taiwan tries to address the various multifaceted threats that it faces, and also step up, as Mike says, in terms of trying to contribute to the international community as as other democracies similarly faces the challenges and threats emanating from the Chinese Communist Party. The third of which is the economic situation and economic coercion. Namely, again, these are toolkits that Taiwan has faced for decades. It has understood the nature of the threat of the People's Republic of China for a very long time. And it's because of this sort of the structural changes that Mike has referenced in how the geopolitical situation has changed substantially since the late 90s, for instance, when again many Western leaders, American leaders, sort of believed in the false hope that that greater integration of the People's Republic, of the PRC, would lead to greater liberalization. That we find ourselves now in a situation that no, in fact, it is the PRC that is changing the international system, not the other way around. That we are slowly catching up to respond now to this greater dependency on the PRC that has created leverages that has helped the CCP to influence our domestic politics and influence our democratic systems. And so, in response to these different measures, including, of course, the most visible of which is the military intimidation and coercion that the People's Liberation Army has been engaged in, both not just only against Taiwan, but certainly there it's clear to see. But increasingly bellicose and aggressive behavior vis-a-vis its neighbors. Most currently right now, seeing what is happening in the South China Sea with the Philippines. Their increased cooperation with Russia with regards to supporting its aggression against Ukraine. And furthermore, providing arms, internationally, to malign actors that, we start to see the nature of the Chinese Communist Party in a very different light. And these are going to be, I think, the conditions by which, that is going to shape the external environment facing the Lai administration that is going to, I think, lead to greater, sort of continuity in the broader structural issues that are affecting the Lai administration. I think it's reassuring to note that both in words, and we'll see certainly in deeds, from colleagues who are much more in tune with, I think, the new administration's policies, that has insisted on greater continuity in the approaches taken by the former administrations, both in cross-strait policy as well as in support of a more building on that trust in the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. And I think that trust is going to be a key variable in ensuring that in the future, as I think the PRC is going to spare no effort to try to drive a wedge between the Lai administration and the United States, given some of the issues that William had referenced earlier in his comments, to really have a clear communications channel. So I certainly do not admire the work ahead that that many will have to do here in order to communicate effectively about the policies and actions and what happens in Taiwan to policymakers here. But I think that, again, these are important structural variables that reflect on both not the continuity within Taiwan that we see, but also the continuity in the U.S. approach and support for Taiwan. I think in this town, for many of you who lives here, there's rarely anything that the two sides of the aisle in Congress can agree on, except perhaps on Taiwan. And that is a remarkable reflection of the robust support that Taiwan has across the board between Republicans and Democrats alike. And you see that reflected in the policies undertaken in the transition between the former Republican Trump administration to now the Democratic Biden administration. And I think that is both a reflection both of the understanding of the critical strategic importance of Taiwan, increasing strategic importance in Taiwan, the broader external context of the competition between democracies and autocracies that has emanated in the policy approach of the current administration, and also the reality of the greater contestation of both the European as well as the Asian theaters from authoritarian revanchism. And all these sort of variables, I think, will be important elements shaping the external environment within, beyond Taiwan, but also where Taiwan, in its effort to step up, to really sort of bolster its, resilience and defenses against the PRC, both, in terms of the cross-strait contest, but playing a greater role internationally, is going to be key in going forward as we face as the Lai administration faces the challenges ahead. And with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Russell, for that background on giving us the context of what the Lai administration will be working under in terms of the external conditions. And in this next portion, we have the moderated discussion. And both William talked a lot about kind of the internal criticisms and the external kind of international relations conditions. And so for this first session, I would like to bring us back to kind of more of the domestic policies. And then we'll go into more about the foreign policy aspect of the Lai administration that's facing. And then some of the kind of recent issues specifically that we're dealing with. So with this first question, as William mentioned earlier, talking about the election result of January, it's been widely discussed. Even though Lai has secured another 4 years with the DPP as the president, however, the party no longer has a majority in the legislature due to growing voter discontent on domestic issues. So what are the primary domestic priorities for President Lai Ching-te's administration? And how do these priorities reflect the current challenges faced by Taiwan? And Mike, I would like to see if you can start with that.
Well, like I said, there's, like I said earlier, there is what's called a Project of Hope, which Lai has outlined his approach to the questions that are very much on the minds of especially the young cohort in Taiwan. It involves a wide range of trying to build a, quote, just society, realizing a sustainable future. Those are the words that they're using. It involves trying to approach some of these basic questions, and I think the hardest one is going to be the inequality in the structure of the, of Taiwan's economy. You have the IT sector, the GDP growth in Tsai Ing-wen's time was immense, and TSMC continues to go off the charts as AI rises and the need for these chips becomes even more important. So Taiwan's economy, when looked in broad strokes, is doing quite well. But when looked at in terms of wage inequality, structural inequality of sectors, the farming sector, other sectors, you don't have the same equality, and that's a hard issue to get to try to solve here in the United States, and it's going to be hard for Taiwan as well. So that's one big question. The other question is, how do you create an environment for younger people who want to get married, have a family, A, to buy a house, B, to have education for their kids, how to get adequate wages to meet all these questions. That demands a whole new look at things, to me, at a kind of a social welfare program. After all, the DPP was founded as a democratic progressive party, basically kind of looking at the models in Europe of the social democratic approach. How do you provide basic structural support for people in terms of income, in terms of other amenities like housing, et cetera, education? These are questions that have to be met and are not easy to meet anywhere. I think it's going to be a question then about whether the LY will provide a backstop for that or whether there'll be an obstacle. That's where it's going to be a question.
Thank you so much, Mike. So you mentioned some of the next the questions that I was going to ask about economic policies, and next I'd like to kind of switch gears to social policies, social issues. The DPP in the past faced criticism over issues related to transitional justice, particularly efforts to address historical injustices from the martial law period, as you talked about earlier, under the KMT. Progress has been slow due to legal delays, controversy, and divisive public opinion. How does President Lai plan to tackle divisive social issues such as transitional justice going forward?
One question that has arisen in the transitional justice question is, as they uncover more and more of the history, look more and more about who was doing what, people have found that some of the people that they thought were friends were actually not friends, or were reporting on people. You begin to see some tensions over how much of that is important to relay publicly and what to do about it. So I think some of the criticism of transitional justice issues not being attacked as forcefully as some people would like, it comes up in what do you do with these kind of complex questions? How do you remediate the problem that your neighbor was reporting on you and you wound up in jail for however long? These are not easy questions, right? They're not easy questions to deal with. I think in broad strokes, they've done what they can with the transitional justice, try to reclaim some of the stolen assets, for example, so that money that the KMT appropriated for itself can now be used for other issues. But dealing with the personal dynamics has not been easy, at least that's my experience. I don't know if Russell or William have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd like to open it up to see if William, you have any comments on the transitional justice or your observations?
So I feel like the transitional justice discussion in Taiwan has, unfortunately, I think more and more of the public are now viewing it purely as the DPP's political tools to go after the KMT. That narrative obviously has been pushed quite a bit by the KMT in society, and outside, beyond the core supporters of the DPP, a lot of people do seem to agree that some of these very cosmetic moves that the DPP has focused on in its initial pursuit of transitional justice may have been unnecessarily broad, including, I think, the determination of removing all statues of Chiang Kai-shek. I recently did actually a story about it because one of the young DPP legislator, Fonte, again pushed the outgoing minister at the time about when are all these Chiang Kai-shek statues are going to be removed. And I did a story about it. I talked to some real white terror survivors and victims about how do they view the so-called call to just wipe out all the statues. And how they look at it is they are also not satisfied with the DPP's efforts on the front of transitional justice. From their perspective, a lot of the initial moves and the programs have been very cosmetic. It didn't really address the real justice that is supposed to be, I think, reclaimed for the victims, and rather a lot of the programs are just making a statement and then proving to the really core supporters and like activists about transitional justice that they are doing something, and then basically they stop somewhere and then didn't continue to the more difficult part of the work. Obviously, this is a very divisive issue that maybe that's why Taiwan decided to pause at a point. But in the eyes of the real victims, they felt like the DPP administration, in the end, unfortunately, politicized the issue way too much domestically. That made it become almost like a taboo for any incoming administration to take any bold steps to address it. So a lot of the so-called historical justice that need to be, I think, restored are now going to become much more difficult for any incoming administration to really make the next push or make the next step. And kind of just wanted to follow up on some of the stuff that Mike said. I think, unfortunately, yes, I agree with the social issues and the nature of the challenge that will be there for the Lai administration to tackle. I think the opposition parties, unfortunately, will do whatever they can inside the LY to force the DPP, the Lai administration, to make certain concessions in order for them to get on board with some of the most necessary budgetary adjustment. or support coming from the LY to make those amendments possible. I think one of the most important front that the opposition parties are looking at, and the Lai administration might actually have to start making, is the energy policy. Because there is indeed a widespread consensus inside Taiwan that the DPP's goal of phasing out all the nuclear power plants at the so-called timeline that they're sticking to right now is impossible. It will deal a huge blow to Taiwan's energy supply, and at the same time, the green transition is just not taking off fast enough. And I think the Lai administration knows that. They are adjusting a little bit from the original ambitious goal that the Tsai administration has set. But right now, basically, both of the opposition parties are very much aligned on their energy approach and the policy, and they will force the Lai administration to make concessions on that. And I kind of look at that as an area where the Lai administration can make concession without sacrificing too much political capital. But that obviously will have to come to his wisdom and also his way of strategizing around, whether that is the battle that he is willing to lose. And then, in exchange for other gains that he can make on the tough issues like the wage and also housing price and also, I think, social welfare.
Can I make 2 quick points, Anny?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just on the earlier question about transitional justice, I think stepping aside from the real merits of addressing past grievances and being able to address those for reconciliation and being able to move the nation forward, is that, in this current context where there is a greater need for unity, for greater national resilience, and an ability to be able to, unite against common threats, or existential threats, namely, that Taiwan faces, it is important that these divisive issues are not, exploited in ways that could provide greater means by which for external actors, namely the Chinese Communist Party, to be able to drive a further wedge within Taiwanese society, because there is, without a doubt, an effort by the PRC to co-opt the Chinese Nationalist Party into its national narrative. This is an ongoing campaign that has been going on since 90s and 2000s. I mean, even earlier than that. But you see these in these sort of restorations of national symbols of the national symbol within the CCP's political narratives. These United Front exchanges celebrating war memorials, an invitation of retired generals and military officers to the PRC to create a common narrative about China's future that aims to basically undermine national unity within Taiwan. So some of these issues where there are, of course, real grievances to address about past horrors and issues that that certainly Mike has referenced in his I think description of the political arc of the formation of the DPP. As we look forward now in this the 21st century, as we're facing this, Taiwan faces this existential threat across Taiwan Strait, that that it keeps in mind in its efforts overall how to address some of these socially and politically divisive issues internally will be key to really enhancing the resiliency of Taiwan's democracy against the threat that it faces across from CCP political warfare. The second point about the internal political dynamics within Taiwan that I think both William and Mike have already covered to a large extent. I think the only point I would add to that is it's important for the ruling party not to write off the smaller opposition parties right now. I think it's key, that I think it's important to keep in mind that while there might be some common interest of the small opposition party with the larger opposition party, the TPP with the KMT, the primary goal of the TPP is to increase its influence And its goal is not to be, in order to do so, it's going to have to find ways to work with both the KMT as well as the DPP, the ruling administration. And its primary driver will not necessarily be to always oppose necessarily whatever the DPP presents, and finding a way to be able to work across the aisle and with the oppositions, will be important. And also important to reference now that the main opposition party right now doesn't have actually a commanding majority. It's because that it has the support in some issues from the TPP that it's able to provide that to have that opposition support. So so it's important to keep that in mind. That's all.
Let me just add, I think it's very important to look at the dynamics both within the Taiwan People's Party, the TPP, and the KMT. KMT is not exactly all on board exactly at the same tone. Fu Kunji, so there's this differences within the party that I think can be exploited, both the TPP and the KMT, and that's going to be up to Lai Ching-te and his political acumen to be able to do that.
Thank you for that discussion. Continuing on President Lai's strategy, so let's talk about the cabinet composition that he's chosen. So President Lai Ching-te's cabinet choices suggest some continuity with the Tsai administration and a strategic balance of factions within the DPP. Key appointments include former Minister of Transportation and Communication Lin Jiarong as the Foreign Minister, and former Vice Premier Zhen Wencang as the chair of the Straits Exchange Foundation. How might these cabinet appointments impact Lai's ability to implement his policy agenda, particularly in areas such as foreign relations and defense? And I'd like to start with Russell.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I do think that, again, overall, the national security and foreign policy apparatuses of Taiwan's government, have largely remained, consistent. It was just a large reshuffling of the many key players into new roles. With the exception, of course, of the new foreign minister as well as the of the Straits Exchange Foundation, correct? Yeah. I think these two personnels are interesting. I think first of all, I think Lin Jiarong, with his background as much more of an administrator, domestically, having had the Ministry of Transportation, provides I think a new fresh perspective to the role of the foreign ministry, especially at a time when it tries to implement its foreign policy objectives through, say, the new southbound policy or through other measures. With his, I think, acumen in domestic transportation issues across the industries that are going to be involved, as it tries to strengthen economic cooperation with other countries in the targets of the new southbound policy, being able to understand, how the domestic industry perspectives are going to be, I think, important for the role of someone who's going to be in charge of trying to implement, certain new strategic initiatives. And I think his prior role, both as an ambassador at large for digital technology issues concerning, the new southbound policy, also, I think, reflects to a degree of which that practical sort of technical knowledge might be applicable to really implementing this policy, and that could, I think, perhaps provide a different approach that might be more, that could potentially be help augment the policy's successes there. I would add that I think, in some ways, the other picks were also a reflection of the Lai administration's willingness to reach across the aisle for picking candidates that are less, perhaps, or seem to be more politically moderate. My understanding, at least with the pick of someone that he's seen as someone across the oppositions, as someone who is not a diehard, sort of orthodox, player in terms of how it views issues across the Taiwan Strait, and could take on a more moderate, stance with that perhaps the CCP, if it's so willing, should, in my personal view, be willing to deal with. But of course, that's a whole other matter in terms of what Beijing. I think its unwillingness, of course, to deal with the Tsai administration, I think underscores, again, its unwillingness to be able to deal with any actors within the Democratic Progressive Party. But these two selections, I think, do reflect these two sort of a nuanced sort of adjustment to how I see the Lai administration approaching foreign policy issues.
Any comments on that?
Yes. I think I hold quite a different view on the appointment of Lin Jialong, especially because we kind of observed closely his initial interactions with foreign dignitaries. I think it shows very obvious that there is a gulf of difference in terms of his familiarity, his level of comfort, and also his expertise in foreign policy when he is interacting with visiting delegations and also making public statements. I think this is definitely an area that is very new to him. He clearly doesn't really feel comfortable at all and confident at all in being able to live up to the same level of I have to say, I think Joseph Wu has been one of the best foreign ministers that Taiwan really has at a very critical time for Taiwan. He was very creative, he was very resourceful, pushing back against I think criticisms or information campaigns against Taiwan, and turned some of the challenges into opportunities for Taiwan to shine a light on its unique strength. But Lin Jialong has always been, in my opinion, he is a steady person. He is a lot less, I think, adventurous when it comes to finding creative ways to be, a policy. I think a minister or a government official. And given the fact that I think the international environment right now is more turbulent than when Tsai Ing-wen first came to office 8 years ago, I'm a little bit concerned that, and there are a lot of big, major, important elections across the world that is going to happen, including one that might have not been talked about a lot, Lithuania. They just had a presidential election. They will have a parliamentary election in October. I was there in November interacting with lawmakers from different sides of the Lithuanian political landscape. There is a potential discussion that will happen about what to do with the relationship with Taiwan. And that will require, in my opinion, a foreign minister who can be creative and at the same time experienced enough to find I think, way to convince Lithuania to at least maintain the level of the relationship, if not, may have any breakthroughs. But I just have some doubts about Lin Jialong being able to actually take up that challenge. And I think Lithuania is only one of probably quite a few different places and countries where potentially there might be some efforts that need to be made by Taiwan to make sure that the progress that have been achieved will not be walked back. So hopefully maybe the Lai administration's plan is to not only let the foreign minister lead on all these, I think, efforts, because obviously we have somebody else in a different position that is very known for her experience. I think Vice President Hsiao would be an excellent person to also take on some of these tasks, and she's already prioritized Europe as one of her first trips after the election before she was inaugurated as the vice president. I think that shows the importance that Taiwan is attaching to Europe, not only just focusing on Taiwan, US. So I think hopefully maybe this dynamic then will balance out a little bit of the clear lack of experience that Lin Jialong has in the foreign policy portfolio.
Thank you so much. Speaking of Hsiao Bi-khim, actually, so one major reason for Hsiao Bi-khim's vice presidency is her extensive foreign policy experience, as you just mentioned, William, and popularity in Washington, D.C. as Taiwan's de facto ambassador when she was here. This critically counterbalances views of Lai as a pro-independence provocateur. Such a dynamic highlights what many scholars describe as the strategic need to balance deterrence against the Chinese aggression and reassurances that the U.S. and Taiwan will not unilaterally change the status quo. How does President Lai to strengthen Taiwan's international presence and alliances, particularly with the U.S. and other democratic nations in this regard? And given Hsiao Bi-khim's pivotal role in U.S.-Taiwan relations, what significant role will she play in President Lai's decision-making circle? Will she be a central figure in shaping policies, or will her role be more symbolic, similar to previous vice presidents? And I'd like to start with Mike.
Well, I've known Hsiao Bi-khim since 1995, so I've got a little bit of history with her. She's very smart, very articulate, very well liked here in Washington. She has the connections that you need. I think she will be the U.S. whisperer for the administration, right? It's a bit of a delicate position, though, because she can't outshine the president, right? That's got to be kind of one of the moderating points, shall we say. But I think she has had and will continue to have direct relationships with a wide variety of U.S. officials that will be now covered over, that won't be public, but I think that'll keep her very much in the game. The fact that she is well known in Europe as well will be very important because, again, whatever happens with the direct diplomatic allies, the most important thing that has happened over the course of the last several years is the breakthroughs in Europe and the breakthroughs in other areas where Taiwan is being recognized, the Taiwan Strait is being recognized as peace and security and stability there is very important. And I think the support for Taiwan will continue to be strong because of her efforts.
Thank you. And Russell, I'd also like to have you take this question. How do you see President Lai plan to strengthen Taiwan's international presence and alliances, particularly with the U.S. and other democratic nations in this regard?
Yeah, I think I see a lot of continuity in the approaches that highlighted, at least in President Lai's inauguration speech, in terms of enhancing democratic solidarity and working with like-minded partners and allies. And I think, there are, I think, wide latitude to work, within the current framework that could be leveraged to more greatly expand Taiwan's international space. I think there's already growing recognition, as Mike alluded to earlier, about the greater recognition of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, and it's about being able to utilize both existing mechanisms as well as new forums to be able to enhance Taiwan's international participation. So, really, I think doubling down on, mechanisms like the global cooperation and training framework that was, established between the United States and Taiwan back in 2015. Be able to leverage that in ways to be able to enhance Taiwan's relations with, Taiwan's non-diplomatic partners. Again, for those who may not be familiar with GCTF, essentially these are now have 4 coordinating partners in addition to the United States and Taiwan. There's Japan and Australia who are formal coordinating partners of this mechanism, and they would organize workshops and capacity building events throughout the world that would bring together third-party countries to engage with partners, with coordinating partners on issues of generally much more transnational nature, and where Taiwan really excels in its capabilities in areas of public health, in areas of environmental issues and areas of also cyber, information security issues. And then this attempts to be able to both provide a means by which these smaller countries may have more difficulties engaging directly with Taiwan due to the PRC's pressure against these countries if they were to engage even in low-level official interactions with Taiwan. But we're having these types of forums held with cooperating partners and on technical issues that are important for the development and capacity of these countries. There are certainly less cause by which the PRC is able to really argue against these types of initiatives. And I think it's important, while these are not substitutes, for sort of other international institutions by which Taiwan absolutely has I think a role to play in being able to meaningfully participate in these organizations, despite of course the continued objection and obstruction by the PRC for not only the Taiwanese government to be able to participate in these forums, but also to prevent the people of Taiwan to be able to engage in some of these international institutions. And this is a detriment not only to the people of Taiwan, but to the international community as well, as really the COVID-19 pandemic made clearly, abundantly, and horrifically clear that had Taiwan's voice been heard properly in international institutions prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, there would be a lot more lives saved as a result of that. And I think being able to really push back against the distortion by the PRC government of international resolutions like UN Resolution 2758 as a means to be able to obstruct relations or sever relations between Taiwan and its diplomatic partners, as was cited to in the case of Nauru. It's just a day after, I think it was a day or two after President Lai was elected as president. Really is going to be, I think, important elements by which both the Taiwan and the United States and like-minded partners can really be able to work together and push back against this distortion of these international issues that the PRC is leveraging to really isolate and justify its aggression against Taiwan.
I think just another thing to add is it will be important to see who the DPP government, the Lai administration, decides to appoint to important de facto ambassador positions around the world. I think in the case of, I think right now when we look across, I would be looking at who will potentially succeed Alexander Yu, who has been here for a while and been, I think, holding up a really good front of continuing the U.S.-Taiwan partnership. But I think coming November, really, there's potentially going to be a drastic change that will require maybe a change of guard here in DC for Taiwan to work on a different set of strategy if potentially there's a switch over here in Washington. But on the European front, I think, for example, Taiwan picked someone who the European audience across the 27 countries are very familiar with. Roy Lee is known previously before the government post as an expert on economics, and he speaks the language of the de-risking that the EU is really highlighting and emphasizing. He was invited to talk in different forums before he became a vice minister, and then appointed to the EU ambassador position, which I think was a great move. And he wasn't a career diplomat, so he has a lot more, I think, less restraints on him he is allowed, and he has been more willing to be charismatic and outreaching. And I think so far the feedback about him in Brussels has been wonderful. People really trust him and have great interactions with him. So I think who the Lai administration decides to appoint to some of the important roles, countries, and target regions will be key for Taiwan to continue the foreign policy efforts that we have seen that was achieved during the Tsai administration, and whether the Lai administration will be able to actually continue that or not. I think the choice of personnel will also be important.
Thank you, William. And continue on this discussion regarding the appointments, because I think oftentimes we also hear that personnel is policy, right? So in regards to defense, right? Defense will be a crucial aspect of Lai's policy, and it is. China remains persistent in its efforts to annex Taiwan, and U.S.-China relations remain strained, as Russell mentioned earlier, providing that context. Earlier in May, the PLA even conducted a military drill to encircle Taiwan. Despite this, Taiwan's transition to an asymmetric defense strategy has been slow, and concerns have been raised with the appointment of Wellington Kuo, the former NSC Secretary General without a military background, as a defense minister. In light of rising regional tensions and Lai's commitment to self-defense, what changes or continuities do you foresee in Taiwan's defense policies under his leadership? Again, Russell, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, I think the pick of Wellington Koo as the defense minister was a very bold decision on the part of the Lai administration. Keep in mind that after 8 years under Tsai Ing-wen, where there has been, a number of efforts to try to install a civilian defense minister, which was always a issue for, I think, both DPP administration as well as, KMT administration in the past, to be able to enhance and strengthen civil-military relations, that the former Tsai administration was unable, at the end, to be able to appoint one for, I think, concerns about how it could affect the administration's relationship with the military. But I think it has come to a point now where some of the essential reforms that have been put on the table, where there are significant measures that have progressed through channels of defense and security cooperation between the United States and Taiwan, that will require important reforms within Taiwan's military, that having a civilian in place that would break apart the stovepipes of that institution that was necessary in not only in the Taiwan context, but also in other militaries, to be able to substantiate the important reforms in other countries here in the United States as well. That this may be necessary in order to again separate the sort of parochial interests of defense ministers who may come from a particular service and be able to prioritize, but only want to prioritize the systems and personnel of that system, to be able to look holistically perhaps at the various elements and spectrums of defense and security capabilities that are going to be necessary to to be able to really enhance the asymmetric defense strategy that has been put forward by the Tsai administration, and now we're approaching a point where I think there's going to be a lot of key areas that will need to be implemented, and having, I think, a civilian defense minister whom admittedly, while it does not have the the sort of the immediate, the most extensive defense experience in relationship with the Ministry of Defense, but having been in his position as the National Security Secretary General of the National Security Council, frequent interactions with the United States, I think has a pretty clear channel of communication and perhaps confidence that at the very least that. In his new position as the defense minister, understands some of the key priorities that are going to be needed in order to really push the defense reforms forward. To what extent that is going to, how that would impact, again, how the defense ministry and interact with the new defense minister, that's another set of questions. But I think that what I've sort of laid out, I think, reflects the sort of rationale that I see, at least in terms of why, again, someone like Wellington Koo was appointed by President Lai at the outset of his administration. Again, I want to emphasize, I think this is a very bold decision on his part.
The setup of the Defense Innovation Unit by Wellington Koo in the MND, I think is a very important first step. Trying to put together the expertise that Taiwan has in its public sector and its private sector, trying to make sure that, for example, that it can offer civilian-run defense technology companies and use them in developing innovative, new, forward-leaning ways to deal with the defense of Taiwan and to meet the threat from China. This is very important stuff. And my understanding that for the years that Wellington Koo was at the National Security Council, he and Su Zhiqian and others there were working in effect like the Office of the Secretary of Defense here, kind of as a civilian component. They weren't officially in line, but they did develop a whole set of approaches to defense that I think will be play well, including, and very importantly, how to deal with reserves effectively. Because Taiwan has a huge reserve force, but it's not very well doesn't keep up to date, and needs to be integrated, because at this point, given one of the biggest problems Taiwan has is its demographics. The rapidly aging population, a smaller pool of people to draw from. For your military, have to extend conscription for a year, maybe talk about conscription for women. There are a lot of issues now that are on the plate, but I think Koo has a larger vision, and maybe you can move it forward.
Thank you. And I'd like to kind of transition a little bit into cross-strait relations. There is significant concern in both Taiwan and the U.S. about how Lai will manage cross-strait relations. Previously, as the mayor of Tainan, he labeled himself as a pragmatic worker for Taiwanese independence, a label that he continues to be associated with, as William mentioned earlier. His inaugural speech has also been interpreted in various ways. Some say that it adheres to the status quo and seeks continuity in Tsai's policy, while others note his more assertive tone by referring to the PRC as China rather than mainland. That said, he maintains that he is open to dialogue with China based on mutual respect, and even extends an invitation to reopen cross-strait tourism and educational exchanges. How might Lai navigate the complexities of the cross-strait relationship while maintaining Taiwan's sovereignty? Mike, would you like to start?
I think the important thing to start off with is to be aware of the fact that during her 8 years of work, the PRC has not offered any sign of willingness to talk to the Tsai administration. And so no amount of reassurances by the Taiwan side, it seems to me, are going to be effective in meeting the Chinese halfway, because the Chinese do not want to meet halfway. That's the most important point, I think, to be made. Lai has said he's willing to meet as long as there's equity, right, and parity, and no preconditions in the meeting. Well, the Chinese are not about to go into any conversation with no preconditions. They have a precondition. There's one China, you're part of us, and that's the end of the story, by and large. So I think Lai understands the position, is willing to meet if possible, but I don't think he's going to be any flamethrower on the cross-strait issue.
So I was just recently in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue, had the rare opportunity to really interact with PLA people directly in conversations, and also with Chinese, basically former defense government officials. I think it's very safe to say that in Beijing's eyes, they absolutely see no point to soften the stance on Taiwan, especially under the leadership of Lai Ching-te. They directly already view his inauguration speech as a departure from even Tsai Ing-wen's policies. They claim that he is de facto renewing the two-country theory that Li Denghui famously first introduced during a 1996 interview with Deutsche Welle, actually. So I think for him right now, facing this, I think, direct rejection of engagement at all from Beijing, and possibly an increase of, I think, driving wedges from Beijing. We've already seen that playing out multiple occasions with Fu Kunqi's KMT delegation visiting China, the most recent Straits Forum. And so I think what he might have to do is to do a lot more work to convince the Taiwanese domestic audience that his approach is not really going to lead to further deterioration of the situation across the Taiwan Strait. But how he will be able to do that really depends on the way that he frames and he, I think, basically cultivates his arguments. I didn't necessarily think he got off to a really good start with the inauguration speech. I think we can understand that he wanted to present himself as firm, but also steady in the languages and the way that he is addressing some of the important issues and laying out his arguments. But at the same time, I think the very, very intricate departure from the use of the languages on some of the most sensitive issues have planted the seed of doubt among some Taiwanese population, especially those that are really concerned about the potential rise of a Chinese invasion. So I think in order for him to really reverse that, some real policy implementations and introduction will be necessary on the cross-strait front to maybe reverse back a little bit of that tone that has been already set by the inauguration speech. I mean, I personally don't necessarily think he really departed from Tsai Ing-wen's approach, as some, I think, analysts might have suggested. But I do think that the tone that he used and the wording that he has chosen to plant it throughout the entire speech was clear enough to people in Beijing, people in Washington, a lot of people in Taiwan, that at the end of the day, he is a different leader, so he will have a slightly different, perhaps, vision for how the status quo should be maintained. And I think that's natural and understandable, but because he is facing, I think, an even more delicate and challenging cross-strait landscape after 2022, basically. So there will be need of a adjustment, in my opinion, to how he crafted out his cross-strait policy going forward.
Well, you know, actually, when I read the speech, I found that the speech was well within the bounds of the predecessors. You know, I think a lot of the analysts or analysis that I've seen, you know, concerning the speech have focused on what, you know, William had, you know, referenced, which, you know, the use of, you know, the lack of the reference of the mainland, or perhaps the absence of the reference to the 1992, the so-called 1992 consensus, or that of a particular act promulgated, of course, in accordance and authorized by the Constitution. But these are generally superficial in my perspective. I think there was actually quite an emphasis on the ROC Constitution in his speech. There were actually, in fact, more references to the ROC Constitution in President Lai's inauguration speech than even President Tsai in her first inauguration speech in 2016. And perhaps he goes even further in explicitly referencing articles within the Constitution, you know, to support his assertion that the ROC and the PRC are not subordinate to each other, a position that is clearly consistent with both DPP and KMT presidents, and that both national sovereignty is formed on the basis of the ROC Constitution, and that ROC sovereignty extends only to the area under the effective control of the ROC government. And so given the fact that the PRC has never exerted or control over Taiwan, the context of this emphasis on the ROC Constitution is, as in my view, at least, interpretation of it entirely consistent with the current status quo. And so while there are, I think, slight variations with regard to tone and emphasis, but to Mike's earlier point, there's just not going to be anything that a DPP president can say that will ever assure Beijing. And given, I think, again, the measured approach taken by the Tsai administration over the last 8 years in regards to how the former president has articulated and framed her policy and cross relations with at the very least acknowledging the spirit, the meetings of the 1992 meetings, and that that Beijing was not going to give any quarters to the DPP president, and as such, providing sort of unnecessary concessions to the Chinese Communist Party would be certainly entirely unnecessary, at this point. So forth as I think he understands, the basis and of both his authority as well as the relationship of the ROC and Taiwan, and I think his subsequent articulation of his view about the role of the relationship between ROC and Taiwan, most recently in a speech that he delivered in the centennial of the founding of the celebration of the Whampoa Academy, reflects the degree to which he understands that there is a need for a greater consensus within Taiwan, about the relationship of Taiwan and ROC, and for the fact, and I would say this, that but for the fact that for Taiwan, the ROC would have ceased to exist if it had not relocated to Taiwan. And also as well, if the ROC had not relocated to Taiwan, Taiwan could very well be under PRC control at this point. So, I think that is something that is, I think, important to keep in mind. And never along this time continuum had, ROC been subordinate to the PRC, was PRC subordinate to the ROC.
I think just wanted to add a little bit more domestic context. I think it is correct that Lai Ching-te should continue to highlight the Chinese threat, but the current domestic atmosphere among Taiwanese people is really, I think, whoever that can really show them that status quo can be maintained, then is someone that at the end of the day will, I think, be more convincing when in regards to the way of life will not be changed in Taiwan. I think he, unfortunately, is on the back foot because Beijing is continuing to change the status quo of the Taiwanese Strait and then redirect the blame at him, and with the opposition parties in collaboration of really amplifying that blame on the Lai Ching-te administration. It is up to him to having to shake off these baggages, I think reshape the domestic conversation so that I think the opposition party and the CCP's accusations of him is not going to really become the mainstream belief that he is the instigator of, or he is the reason why the status quo, or Beijing decides to change the status quo. Because right now, this is the very loud public messaging that has been overshadowing his messages on the China threat, unfortunately. And I think the uncertainties that Taiwanese people are feeling right now about the cross-strait dynamic is probably a little bit higher, I would say, than compared to over the last 8 years during Tsai Ing-wen's administration. It's no fault to him, but I think it's the effect of the Chinese and the opposition parties, I think, attacks on him. But he really needs to find a more effective pushback against that and then change the tone of that domestic dialogue.
Thank you, William. So with the interest of time, I would like to open this up to the audience. Alan, I saw your hand up.
Hi, my name is Alan Jones. I'm a new registered in Georgetown. I want to ask a question about Taiwan's East Asian front. So Taiwanese Ambassador Frank Hsiao, he has been a hero of Taiwan for fostering good Taiwan-Japan relations for a prolonged period of time since 2016. But my concern is that he's actually older than President Trump. So my question is, can Taiwan also find a great successor for Ambassador Hsiao to maintain unshakable good Taiwan-Japan relations? And my second question will be that, can Taiwan also deploy a higher ranked official to South Korea as well? Thank you. Taiwan is not lacking in good people who can deal with it. And there's a very strong relationship between the DPP generally and Japan, as you probably know. I don't think there's going to be I mean, Frank Hsiao has done a good job, there's no doubt about it. But there are other people who could do a good job, I'm sure of that. South Korea, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think South Korea basically is a lot of it's a much tougher cookie to crack because of the North Korea factor that Seoul will forever have to factor in. So they unfortunately will always be a lot more careful and reserved on any potential policy change on their approach towards Taiwan because it requires somewhat of an amicable or at least a working relationship between Seoul and Beijing to make sure that Pyongyang is not going to be encouraged or getting the green light from Beijing to have a loose, basically like having the freedom to do whatever they want towards further provoking the situation on the Korean Peninsula. So I think that's why South Korea is quite of a different breed compared to Japan when it comes to their policies towards Taiwan.
Yeah, I'll just add one more contextual point. I think, while there are certainly limits, both in terms of Taiwan-Japan relations as well as Taiwan-South Korea relations, we are on an unprecedented, I think, period where there are a lot of opportunities, to enhance and deepen relations between Taiwan and Japan as well as Taiwan and South Korea. I think in a South Korean context, it is unprecedented to have seen the degree to which the South Korean president has taken the initiative to be able, for at least in responding to the issues concerning the Taiwan Strait, to highlight both South Korea's concern about peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And there has been ongoing discussions within South Korea regarding peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait and the potential role that the Republic of Korea could play. This is, again, hasn't happened before, and it is happening now, and I think it's important to deepen those exchanges, strengthen those dialogues, between Taiwan and South Korea, and certainly between Taiwan and Japan, and I think those are going to be very key important relationships that Taiwan will need to broaden and deepen, and I would include the Philippines as well in this regard.
Please, sir.
My name is Bill. I have a couple of things I'd like to share with Mr. Yang. First one, honesty is something you don't normally see from a politician. President Lai is honest. I give him credit for that. That's how he won my heart. Number one. Number two, in terms of the legislative election in Taiwan, why are they so hard? We're losing so many seats. If you look into the seat in the south, if the mayor is DPP, Tainan, Kaohsiung, they got all that elected. The other part, you have to know in Taiwan, the so 立法委员 It's something to do with the local. So local people are the one pick up their own people, and this is where the problem is coming from. DPP traditionally did not, it hasn't been doing very well locally. It has been going on forever. This is one thing they need to work on. In terms of you change the tone, whether you change the tone or the way that, sugar coating, all this good stuff recently upon, change the tone. I don't think it makes any differences. I really do not believe it's going to make any differences.
Thank you. We have a couple, go ahead. I'm just gonna take a couple more questions and then we'll have the panel kind of address them. You right there, yeah.
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Samuel Chen. I'm a national security student at George Washington University. Thank you very much. Beyond the general support for democracy, I think it's pretty obvious that a lot of Taiwan's value to America comes from its semiconductor manufacturing. And while I believe that the American fabs that are being built right now due to the CHIPS Act aren't going to be producing the latest advanced 3nm chips, I could be incorrect, but I don't believe they're producing the most advanced ones. But my question to the panel would be, does the Lai administration see America's efforts to try to near shore or directly manufacture semiconductors in the United States as a problem? Is the Lai administration trying to encourage this? Do they see this as something that they will suddenly have to roll with? I want to know what the administration's stance on American reshoring of semiconductor manufacturing. What does this entail for American commitments on continuing Taiwan's defense? Thank you, guys.
And then gentleman right behind you.
Hi, thank you all for your very interesting remarks. My name is Ian Everhart with the Institute of World Politics. I was hoping to hear more about President Lai's efforts to improve Taiwan's military readiness. And because if you look at Israel and Ukraine, they both have had long-standing policies of preparing large numbers of reservists to go into battle, and they've been fairly successful at that so far. So I'm just wondering what the Lai administration will do to improve Taiwan's whole society war footing. Thank you.
Yeah, one more, then one more.
Thank you for the great discussion. I'm Joey Yang. I work as an assistant professor of accounting from the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And my question is related to some of the previous questions. It's easy to ask, but hard to answer. What should Lai administration do? And why I ask this question is, in my opinion, what KMT and the TPP do is basically what the Communist Party in the history do. Why? Because the Communist Party is very good at attacking others' weaknesses, and they just don't provide any solutions. And this conclusion has been made by Sun Yat-sen. I know some of the people don't like him, but whatever. He said that 100 years ago. He said, Communist Party is good at identifying the problems, but they don't provide solutions. And I'm pretty sure many of us have watched the perennial debate in 2020 and 2024. And the KMT candidates always say something like, many people around Tsai are corrupted. And of course, for both times, Tsai and Lai said, okay, if you have the evidence, you go to a court and sue us. But the problem is I kind of agree with William, we always say, the KMT and DVD receive money from China, we need to have the evidence. Okay, when they accuse us, they don't need the evidence. I know the war is kind of unequal in some way, but that is why I have this question, because I've heard a lot of facts. I agree with most of them, but what should Lai do now? Thank you.
I
don't think we have time maybe yet.
Yeah. So we'll turn it back to the panel. Mike, would you like to start? There's a question about nearshoring, reflection of U.S. commitment, military readiness, and what Lai should do in the face of what's been happening with the LY, the coalition of KMT and TPP.
Yeah, on the TSMC question, you're right. The high-end chips probably won't be produced here in the States for some time to come. It's a very delicate and unique process that you have to go through for all of and then TSMC really is the market on how to do that. Someday they'll catch up, and someday the Chinese may catch up. The question is there more to do? And I think right now what Taiwan is looking at is the development of AI and how its use of chips and other parts of its IT infrastructure can be integrated into the development of AI. So that's another area where I think Lai is looking to create Taiwan into what's called a smart tech island. That's the words he uses. And using industrial AI industry, et cetera, as a way to move Taiwan forward in this competition over who's going to be the best place to produce the equipment needed for development of AI. A lot more can be said about that, but I think we'll leave it at that. The reserve question, I hope that I answered that a little bit. Certainly that's one of the things that Wellington Gu has looked very strongly at. It's absolute need for, I saw the number the other day, 2 million or so reserves at this point. These are people who have been in the military, done their service, and have gone out into the real big wide world, or have been soldiers for a longer time. These are people that need to be better trained on contemporary equipment, right? Better coordinated, better organized, so that, again, God forbid there should never be kinetic activity by the Chinese. They're ready, when the whistle blows, they'll be ready. I think there's a real serious understanding that this is something that has to be taken seriously, especially on the training side. I'll leave it at that for me.
I think just in terms of the first question about perceptions within Taiwan concerning nearshoring efforts by the United States, I think the issue that I would want to sort of take a step back here. I think, and we have to be mindful of the fact that the CCP is engaged in information operations within Taiwan. There's an information operation campaign to amplify multiple narratives within Taiwan that do exist indigenously within Taiwan, but amplify within the political discourse about this hollowing out effect within Taiwan's domestic industry to raise concerns about U.S. reliance, reliability, and credibility in the support of Taiwan. These are amplified through social media channels, PRC, and official media. This is not to say that there are domestic legitimate concerns about how industries within Taiwan is going to be affected by moving out or going towards other third-party countries. And to the degree that I understand how policymakers view some of these issues, the concern is less about the need to be able to produce capacity outside of Taiwan, because there's actually already capacity issues within Taiwan to produce the types of chips that are already needed. So to a certain degree, Taiwan's industry does need to move out in any case, whether or not it is incentivized by U.S. policies to do so. But the problem, the issue that I see at least, is with how it sort of this issue is amplified and exacerbated by PRC information operations. And this leads to the other issue that I was trying to emphasize at an earlier point, is that the degree to which the success of Taiwan in addressing these types of political warfare campaigns cannot be one that can be set aside as a result of a reference now to think, oh well, the PRC hasn't been very successful in the last election. We didn't really see, or it wasn't very effective. So maybe this isn't a problem. No, the only reason why it wasn't expected is because actually the government and civil society within Taiwan has been working so exemplarily in terms of their efforts to be able to address these types of issues through civil society efforts, through government efforts to debunk some of these information campaigns as they emerge, that we have to be really maintain that vigilance both within Taiwan but also internationally in addressing these information operations. So but I think perhaps the other concern would be rising concerns, I think, and discussions about the potential for military conflict over Taiwan. I think the more concerned about is that with growing concerns about the potential for military conflict reflected in U.S. political discourse and security discourse, the concern within Taiwan is about, well, look, are businesses and people going to feel safe here? And that's why what led to sort of headlines of economists like the most dangerous place on earth, that creates the perception that despite the fact that the situation across the Taiwan Strait remain while growing tensions, there are still, a rather a relative peace there that must be maintained, and you don't want to create this sort of these conditions that will create unnecessary concerns about the exacerbation of tensions across the Taiwan Strait.
And just that, I think, I feel like there's way too much focus on the longer term preparation for the military capabilities. I mean, that's important, but what we've been seeing right now since February is a lack of training and protocols in Taiwan's Coast Guard. That is a real area where China is already, I think, poking Taiwan's real weakness. I mean, Taiwan's Coast Guard, unfortunately, has been not very professionally equipped, professionally trained with protocols to respond to gray zone operations. We have been seeing an increase of the Coast Guard, Chinese Coast Guard operations near the outlying islands of Kinmen and Matsu, and that's been challenging Taiwan's claim for sovereignty, territorial claims, and this is an area that the Lai administration has identified. They are trying to improve, but I think a lot of immediate lessons that can already be drawn from is from how the Philippines has been doing it, because in the initial confrontations, Taiwan's Coast Guard, unfortunately, are not even equipped with the basic recording devices, and the strategy of how to, publicize these encounters will be important for the Taiwan Coast Guard. So rather than, only looking at the longer term military capacities, I think the weakness on the Coast Guard front is more important. So how to, I think share resources across the board from the military and the coordination between the military and the Coast Guard, the support that the military can provide to the Coast Guard will be more important for the near-term future. And I think regarding the legislative yuan, I think what some of the analysts and myself all agree on is the DPP really needs to start becoming better at communicating their policies with hard evidence, with numbers, with research to back up their claims, instead of letting some of the more senior lawmakers in their caucus inside the legislature to basically parrot things like Xi Jinping is behind this, and Fu Quanqi is already colluding with the Chinese without having say, this is the evidence, this is why we think that this is already happening. But the initial arguments that they presented during the whole back and forth in the legislative yuan, during the legislative amendments, unfortunately has set the tone, basically making it difficult for the DPP to reinvent itself. But I think going forward, it's important for them to differentiate themselves from the outright accusation that the KMT and the TPP has been using, and to craft their arguments a little bit more, I would say, stronger with hard evidence to support it.
Thank you, William, and thank you all for being here for a really rich discussion. We know that we're just a few minutes over time, but let's first give a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you, Patrick and U.S. Taiwan Watch for co-hosting this event this morning. And I think Wendy has some comments.
Just some few last words, and thank you all the panelists and moderator for the wonderful perspectives and observation on Lai's policies and strategy. Thank you all for being here. As U.S. Taiwan Watch, we would like to host more events like this, so please stay here and tell us what you think. Are there speakers or topics you would like us to encourage and bring to you all in DC? Just thank the volunteers, Kevin from FAPA, Peng Shun, and Henry and Jenny, who's not here, from U.S. Taiwan Watch, for really making this happen. So yeah, please stay. We have the venue in, and grab some donuts and drinks. Thank you.
Sounds? Daniel?
我们学校的。